urge the generous British public, to come forward and support this appeal. The situation is very dire, devastating for the families who are living without shelters. Now, with winter closing in, people are asking for shelters. We would like to scale up what we are doing, but without support, it's impossible, to cover for the huge needs growing every passing hour and passing day.
OK, Shahzada, we've got to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. That was the News Hour. Thanks very much for watching. Coming up, it is the Politics Hub with more on the Tory leadership campaign.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win. Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Tonight, the Conservatives' bombshell leadership vote sparks bafflement, with rumours of too clever by half voting tactics backfiring. Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch are the final two going through to the vote by party members. We'll now ask who's in pole position. Well, this time yesterday, James Cleverly was the favourite. Tonight, he's out. What went wrong? Complacency or tactical blunder? I've been speaking to Robert Jenrick. He's promising he'll lead a clean campaign. We'll see how that one goes. I'll also be joined by the Culture Minister, Chris Bryant, who's described both Conservative candidates as dim-witted and insists he's trying to be nice. Also tonight, ahead of the 40th anniversary of the Brighton hotel bombing, I've been speaking to the daughter of an MP murdered in the IRA attack, Jo Berry. And as the Badenoch and Jenrick teams prepare to go out across the country to meet Conservative Party members, we'll take a look back at previous Conservative leadership campaigns. All that and more with Matthew Torbett and Tim Montgomery, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, we've got lots of politics to get through tonight, but first I do want to take you to the US and give you an update on that expected hurricane, because more than 5 million residents have been told that they have to leave their homes, with Hurricane Milton just a matter of hours away from bearing down on the state's west coast. Well, the storm is feared to be the worst in more than a century. Here, the Foreign Office have said they're closely monitoring the hurricane's development, and they're urging all British nationals in or travelling to Florida to follow the advice on the ground. Well, our US correspondent James Matthews is in Tampa. He sent us this update.
This storm's been on its way, due to hit big time in the early hours of tomorrow morning. But already, you know, it's windy. I can barely hear you because of the roar in my ear. And the rain is horizontal now. It's interesting listening to Ron DeSantis, the governor. He has echoed the warnings of recent days from various local officials about the danger of death. They realise they're up against the challenge of complacency, of hurricane fatigue in Florida, where they have had the warnings, they have sat tight and survived. The message this time is that it's different this time. That's why they are rolling out the figures of wind speed, 180 miles an hour as this storm makes its way. A storm surge now up to 12 feet. That's the depth of water due forecast to come ashore and travel deep inland. That's the kind of storm surge that killed people in Hurricane Helene within the past 2 weeks. And, you know, these verbal warnings are reinforced by the destructive power of Helene. That killed more than 230 people. And I've spoken to a few people who say that that is the trigger for them to get out of town. And get out of town they are. I'm in Tampa, and the streets are empty. Overwhelmingly, the population has made its way to safety, whether that's out of the state itself or to emergency shelters. There is a particular concern here in Tampa, of course, because it's an urban area, built up, population 400,000. They haven't had a storm, a hurricane here the size of the power of Milton for more than 100 years. So given the concentration of people in this particular part of Florida, that is a huge concern. The fact that Tampa itself, this population centre, is currently under threat and in the pathway of Hurricane Milton. So right now, it is the waiting game, a game of chance for many people who, as I say, have lived through hurricanes, who have sat tight and watched the path of the hurricane avoid them in the past. That has engendered a complacency in Florida. It's a challenge for the authorities to tell people to get out, take it seriously, and they're falling over themselves to issue dire warnings. We have the mayor of Tampa saying if you stay in an evacuation zone, you are going to die. She's describing houses today in evacuation zones as coffins. So that's the kind of language that is being used alongside one sheriff who this morning has said to people, members of the local population, if you are going to stay in your house when you've been told to vacate, write your name and next of kin on your arm so that we know to whom we should deliver you when you die. That's the kind of language being used in Florida this morning.
James Matthews there with that update from Florida. We'll, of course, keep you updated on the progress of that expected hurricane. For now, though, back to the politics. What on earth is going on with the Conservative leadership contest? That's the question I'm asking tonight. We now know the final two, Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, but blimey, it has been a roller coaster getting here. James cleverly surged, then flatlined, then really surged and then lost votes. Robert Jenrick rocketed, became the hot favourite, and then lost votes, and then snuck into the final two. Now, honestly, these numbers do not make sense. If they happened in any other political vote, the Electoral Commission would be investigating. There's obviously skullduggery going on. My best guess on what is actually going on? Well, it only makes sense if some people who backed James Cleverly voted for another candidate in this most recent round, assuming their man would make the final two, and then trying to fix an easier final contest. James Cleverly lost 2 votes just overnight, and you would also have thought he would have picked up possibly the bulk of support from Tom Tugendhat voters, seen to be on the centrist wing of the party, similar to James Cleverly. Now, I'm told that any vote lending was absolutely not coordinated by Team Cleverly. But uncoordinated vote lending is perhaps the worst of all worlds, because you don't know who's doing it, you can't see the numbers, and it is easy for it to spectacularly backfire, which it looks like may well have happened here. As one Conservative MP put it to me, this is an electorate full of snakes. Well, let's get a roundup now on a day of shock and alleged skullduggery. Here is Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby.
This the moment and a massive upset.
Kemi Badenoch, 42 votes. James Cleverly, 37 votes. And Robert Jenrick, 41 votes.
Audible gasps from MPs as James Cleverly, who had looked set for the final, is knocked out of the Tory leadership race. Conservative MPs voted instead for a Kemi Badenoch-Robert Jenrick runoff. Cleverly's backers can barely believe it.
I mean, I'm still slightly in a state of disappointed shock. I'd signed James's nomination paper. I had encouraged him to stand. I was firmly behind him. So I'm very disappointed.
Shock because Cleverly had become the front runner after a successful party conference. But now the last centrist stand-in's been knocked out. The next leader of the party will come from the right. Badenoch now in pole position once more.
It is time to go bold. Just because you're not a first preference doesn't mean that people don't want you. And I think that that is what has happened throughout the contest. You could say that about any candidate. People have relationships, people have friends, they have constituency neighbours. These things feed into the MP stage of the contest. What matters now is what our members think.
Her rival Robert Jenrick less popular with party members, but he's hoping his hardline immigration stance wins out.
I want the party to once again occupy the common ground of British politics, which means fixing our NHS, finding ways to grow our economy, and yes, to secure our borders and control and reduce immigration. On each of these areas, I've got a real plan.
There is disbelief around here that James Cleverly's been knocked out of the race after being ahead. Absolutely brutal is how one of his supporters put it to me. So what went wrong? Well, it seems that some of his supporters, so certain their man would make the final two, decided to shift their votes to try and stop Badenoch or Jenrick, and in doing so killed off their own candidates. The Conservative Party will now be run by a right-winger, and that's leaving Labour MPs rubbing their hands in glee. This result could help the Tories fend off the threat of reform to the right, but the party needs a lot more than that to even be in the run-in at the next general election. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Now, I do just want to take a moment and take you through the numbers because it is all quite confusing. So this is the final round of MP voting, right? So we've seen James Cleverly eliminated. He actually lost MPs on 37. And these are the two who've made it through to the final round where members vote. Kemi Badenoch on 42, Robert Jenrick on 41. So things could not be closer. But just to show you the skullduggery, effectively, that was going on, because this is all completely bonkers, right? I want to start right from the beginning. This is the first round of MP voting. This is where things started off with. And then you can see people picking up, some people falling out, Mel Stride falls out. This is when things get really interesting, right? James Cleverly absolutely rockets, so he's got the momentum. The person who did best last time, which was Robert Jenrick, actually loses votes. So you're thinking, OK, I'm starting to get a grip of this. Robert Jenrick didn't have a great conference. James Cleverly is the one to beat. And then the next round, everything gets completely turned on its head again. James Cleverly, the guy who won last time, actually loses 2 votes, doesn't pick up anything from Tom Tugendhat, and it is the other 2 candidates who make it through to the final. The big question now, of course, is what happens next, because after MPs have had their say, it's now the turn of the party members. And this is the closest we get to finding out what they really think. This is Conservative Home polling. Head-to-head, the 2 candidates are still in it. Which candidate would you vote for? And you can see there, it's a pretty clear lead for Kemi Badenoch on 53%, Robert Jenrick on 33%. But I have to say, as we've seen in this race, we don't know what on earth is going to happen. It is an absolute roller coaster, and so I wouldn't, bet your houses on absolutely anything. Now, we did hear briefly, of course, from Robert Jenrick in Beth's report, but let's just hear a little bit more from him because he spoke to me earlier in Parliament just after we got the results. It has been, frankly, a complete roller coaster of an election. You must have been a bit worried.
Look, I am just delighted to have got so much support from parliamentary colleagues today and now to be through to the next round and taking my message to the members again across the country. And that's exactly what I want to do. I've spent the summer setting out my vision for our party and our country, which is one of change. I want the party to once again occupy the common ground of British politics, which means fixing our NHS, finding ways to grow our economy, and yes, to secure our borders and control and reduce immigration. On each of these areas, I've got a real plan. I don't trade in platitudes, I have a plan as to how we provide serious, competent leadership for our party and ultimately for our country.
OK, so what is the one reason that members should vote for you rather than Kemi Badenoch?
Well, I have a plan. I have a detailed plan as to how we're going to take forward these issues.
And she doesn't, is that what you're saying?
I don't think the Conservative Party should trade in platitudes. I don't want it to go down rabbit holes. What I want it to be is a serious party with credible and competent leadership and focused on the whole range of issues that the public care about the most. How do we improve the quality of care for patients in our NHS? How do we drive up living standards for people across this country by getting real growth again? And how do we fix our borders, an issue I've thought about so carefully in recent months?
You've got the pitch out. We've got the pitch. Now it is all over to the membership, that all-important part of the contest. Things are going to get a bit dirty, aren't they? Can you promise a clean contest?
Look, absolutely, and that's the way I fought this campaign now for 3 months.
So will you sack any members of your team who are briefing negatively?
That's not the way I conduct myself, and that's one of the reasons why I've secured support from so many parliamentary colleagues of all different wings of the party. That's one of the reasons I've worked in the governments of 5 Conservative Prime Ministers, because I work with people well, I'm a collegiate person, but I also want to provide direction for this party. We need to be more conservative. We need to ensure that we occupy that common ground of British politics once more.
So let's be honest. You've had a bit of a roller coaster couple of weeks. You started off as a kind of red hot favourite. You were growing in support among members, and then conference happened. And let's be honest, it didn't go quite to plan. Were you a little bit frustrated that you didn't cut through in the way you wanted to at conference, honestly?
Well, I don't know about that, Sophie, because when I started this contest, we were rank outsiders.
No, but what about conference? Come on,
just a few months ago, no one would have predicted we would be in this position today.
I understand the pitch. I know you're kind of keen to get your message across, but genuinely, were you a bit disappointed with how conference went?
Well, I don't think it's always easy to deliver the message that I delivered at conference, which was not platitudes. The message I delivered was we didn't get everything right when we were in government. There were big issues facing this country that we didn't solve, and we need to be different. I stand for change in this contest, and I stand for a clear plan. I set out in that conference speech 5 areas, the 5 big changes this country needs, and unlike others, I didn't just say, well, we'll mess around, we'll debate them for months or years to come. I said, this is the way we need to go. And I want the party now to coalesce around it, to unite around it, the serious solutions to the big issues facing our country.
I know you've got to go, but just finally, what on earth went on with the voting? What on earth went on? I don't understand. I can't get my head around the numbers. People going up, people going down. You must know more than me.
Look, you are a better judge, or as good a judge of this as me. All I can say is, in the privacy of the ballot box, my colleagues put their faith in me to lead this party forward.
There's a bit of skullduggery going on there.
I am very, very honoured and grateful to them, and I hope that I can earn that trust now in the country with the members of the party.
So is it a very mistrustworthy electorate then? What's going on?
these are politicians. But now what I need to do is sell my message of change to the members of the party and most importantly to the public, because this is not just about the Conservative Party, it's how do we provide effective opposition, competent, professional opposition, which is what the public would expect regardless of how they vote, and then how do we move forward as a country.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Robert Jenrick there, he could hardly keep the smile off his face, I thought, in that interview. Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby, is here with us. I just don't know what to say, Beth. I'll be honest.
Where should we start? You've got half an hour.
Yeah, I'll see you in the part of the show.
I mean, I actually called one of Cleverly's team and they were all ensconced in the pub and they just said to me, it's absolutely brutal. And it's often said, as Tim and I were talking about, that the Conservative electorate are what the most sophisticated and most duplicitous. And these two characteristics seem to have collided together tonight in devastating results for Cleverly. I think reading between the lines in differing camps, what seems to have happened is that it seemed that James Cleverly was so nailed on that some of his supporters flipped to either stop Kemi Badenoch or try and stop Rob Jenrick because they thought our guy is safe when he was not. But more interestingly too, Tom Tugendhat's base. Now, he had, 20 votes in the round yesterday? He's a moderate, so is James Cleverly. And you would have expected some of those votes to break for Tom Tugendhat, to break for Cleverly, which is why everyone thought he was nailed on to get to the final two. It looks like what happened was Rob Jenrick phoned every single one of those supporters and said, your man's going through. If you don't want Kemi Badenoch, vote for me. And they have flipped to perhaps Jenrick, or some of them would have flipped to Badenoch because they preferred her over Cleverly. And the end result is that James Cleverly, who many would have wanted to make the final two, is out of the race. I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling.
And it matters, doesn't it? Because as a result, and I know there are differences between Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, but as a result, you have two people in the final two who are on the right of the party, and that's going to impact the colour of the race, right?
Well, there's two things about that. Number one, for the Conservative Party membership, you know, we started this race with, 3 moderates and 3 more to the right, and they've ended the race with 2 right-wingers. So there's a big chunk of the party who are centrist or moderate that will be really unhappy that they don't have a candidate that they can vote for, point one. Point two, the reason I said in the report that Labour are happy is that they genuinely think that James Cleverly is the most risky candidate for them, because they think James Cleverly is a moderate, can speak more to the country and speak beyond the Conservative Party. Now, I'm sure many Conservatives disagree with that. They'll say that he doesn't have the kind of character or the strength of Conservative thought that, say, someone like a Badenoch might have, or a Jenrick, in terms of being very clear on immigration policy. But nevertheless, there's a question now about whether or not, in picking a right-winger, the party can reach out beyond the party to the country. So that is a very live debate now within the party. And you put up the Conservative Home polling. In the YouGov polling we've done, Badenoch was 4 percentage points ahead of Jenrick with party members. She was 18 points ahead before party conference. So the race is narrowing. And the reason I'm telling you that is, as you just said, Sophie, I think it's really hard to call now. And it'd be interesting to see what Cleverly backers will now do in that final two. I mean, it's just been astonishing.
It's like I feel like I've got whiplash. Honestly, the whole thing has been completely mad. Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there. Well, today's surprising result is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph Deputy Comment Editor, Annabelle Denham. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former Labour Party advisor, Matthew Torbit, and the Conservative commentator and Robert Jenrick supporter. Is that fair? You're a Tom Tugendhat supporter now.
Yeah, big Tom
Jenrick.
Tugendhat supporter, but Jenrick's now my candidate.
Yeah, Tim Montgomery. Both great to have you both on the programme. I just don't know. Tim, what is going on? What's happening? Is this an electorate full of snakes?
I think I need to officially resign on your programme as a Tory commentator or something. I don't know whether you need a political analyst to understand the Conservative Party or some kind of psychiatrist or something, because, I was absolutely saying on all the sort of media interviews I did yesterday, as you just said.
Yeah.
Cleverly's nailed on, and actually will be really difficult to stop. And I did a Sam Coates. Do you remember that time when Sam Coates was coming out of Boris Johnson's press conference with his mouth wide open? I sort of felt my jaw drop when I was with some friends watching this today, and it's an extraordinary result. And I think what you were just talking about with Beth is really important as well. I thought a couple of days ago we were likely to have a Cleverly Jenrick contest. And that really would have given members a real choice between a centrist candidate, a really likeable guy, but perhaps really a bit vague on policy, against Jenrick, who's very clear on what he wants to do with the Conservative Party, really sort of reunite the right, get Reform voters back. But actually the choice is much narrower now. I kind of like that personally, but it gives members less of a real option in this race.
And it does also mean, I guess, that the race will be pulled to the right if they're both, I guess, trying to differentiate from a more similar position over stuff like the ECHR or whatever it is.
Yeah, but what I would say, and the polling is, Lib Dem voters, Labour voters, they all want control of immigration. Immigration isn't really a right-wing issue. The whole country thinks immigration is sort of out of control. So some of these labels, right, left, I use them too. They're overused sometimes and oversimplify complicated pictures.
Matthew, can I talk to you about what Labour wants? Because I thought it was interesting what Beth was just saying, how there's many in the Labour Party who are, I guess, breathing a bit of a sigh of relief that it's not James Cleverly that they've got to fight against.
Yeah, I think James Cleverly was the candidate I feared the most, and I think those that I've spoke to, Labour MPs, also thought the same. I think it would be churlish to sort of be complacent about this and expect people to not reach out to the country. I think the only benefit we may have is both candidates seem intent on trying to win Reform voters back, whereas I thought James Cleverly had the correct diagnosis of the most recent election at the Tory party conference by saying it's not just Reform voters that they've lost votes to. It was the Labour Party, it was Lib Dems in the sort of Tory shires and those swing seats that they call the blue wall, and also through apathy. So I think if the Reform voter pool is quite a shallow one. And I think with regards to Beth's analysis, I hope it's the latter. And actually, Robert Jenrick has played a blinder of a campaign in chasing those votes to the last minute, because if not, James Cleverly's team almost seem to have fallen foul of the England football fan syndrome of, well, if we finish second, we'll have an easier route to the quarterfinals. And actually...
Worked for Gareth Southgate, though. Got to the final.
It did, but also I'm a big believer, particularly in politics, if you're good enough, you'll win. And actually, if you believe in your what you're putting out there, you'll beat anybody on your best day. And actually, he had the total momentum from Tory party conference. Really silly if they've done the former.
I'm going to be really mean now. I'm going to ask you for both a prediction about the race. Doesn't have to be the winner, but go on, give us a prediction about what we're going to see in the race.
No. I've got all my predictions wrong, Sophie. I'm not... It is the most duplicitous electorate in the world. MPs, members, I think, are slightly more predictable. But the Conhome polling, it's a reasonable guide, but it has sort of been out by 10% in previous contests. So I think... candidates are going to have to cross, and I'm not going to do any more predictions.
Are you going to do one?
Anything can happen. I think it's Badenoch's to win. I think she lasts maybe 2 years after Reform don't go away, and not particularly good locals, and actually James Cleverly gets a second bite at the cherry.
See, there you go. That's a proper prediction.
I'm still not playing your game.
All right, thanks very, very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. How are Labour feeling about the final two Conservative candidates? The Culture Minister, Chris Bryant, will join us, and he is not holding back. Stay with us.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave.
For many people, Harvey is far from over. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
We help you understand the world with us. we are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over, and this is a country in crisis.
You don't want to be remembered this way. You always want to be remembered as something positive.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again? I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back. So, what is Labour making of the final two Conservative leadership candidates? I've been speaking to the Culture Minister, Chris Bryant, after a tough couple of weeks for the government, with rows over freebies and rumblings about a lack of direction from Number 10, culminating in Keir Starmer effectively sacking his Chief of Staff. But this week is supposed to be the reset, and today ministers want to talk up their fresh help for the UK film industry. Take a listen. Thank you very much for being on the programme. Well, the big news today, I guess, aside from, of course, your film industry news, is the results of the latest round of the Conservative Party leadership. We know the final two now, Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch. Who do you think could cause most trouble for Labour?
I'm not sure that any of them can, and I think this process has shown it, because I don't think they've really at any point shown that they understand why they lost the general election. You know, the chaos, the hating one another, the obsession with Europe, and banging on about Europe, and now it looks like their leadership contest in the final stages is all going to be about whether they leave the European Court of Human Rights. The fact that nothing works in this country, you know, spending commitments that didn't amount to anything, problems with economic growth and the biggest fall in living standards in our history. I don't think they've understood any of why they lost, and that's the first prerequisite for an opposition. You've got to do that first. And I suspect, I may be wrong about this, but my guess is that James Cleverly got a bit complacent, didn't end up ringing round everybody who voted for him last round and just thought, oh, I'm a shoo-in now. And it's complacency which does for politicians in the end.
That's interesting. So that's your theory on why the numbers seem to change.
Yeah, there's that. And another bit maybe, which is, I spoke to a couple of Tory MPs last night, and they were both obsessed with voting for somebody who wasn't their preferred outcome, but to keep the other person out. So I think there's still a bit of hating. Anyway, look, it's their issue, private grief, but, you know, they both seem to me to lead with their chins, and both of their chins are made of very fine porcelain.
Interesting, interesting. Well, it's been a rollercoaster of a race. I'm sure there'll be a few more loops.
And somebody's joked in the Labour Party whether we have to declare this as a gift.
Oh, what, because the whole thing is such a gift for the Labour Party?
But, I mean, the message I just said about complacency for them applies to us too. You should never take your opponents for granted just because they look dim-witted doesn't necessarily mean that they can't land punches.
Interesting. What, so you think that they look dim-witted then? Is that what you're saying?
I'm trying to be nice.
Yeah, I'm not sure how well that's going. I'm going to be completely honest with you.
No, look, I mean, my basic point is I don't think they've learnt why they lost. And I remember in 2019 when we lost so badly, sitting in the tea room and thinking, you know what, there's no guarantee at the next election, if we don't get this right now, that we will even be the opposition. There's no guarantee the Tories will be the opposition after the next general election, so they do need to get their act together. And in the end, it's good for everybody if there's a sensible opposition. But they've gone so shrill. I mean, so shrill, and they've become a caricature of themselves, and that doesn't work. And this is exactly what we did. I saw Gavin Barwell commenting on this earlier. We used to work for Theresa May, and he's saying, look, the danger is if the Tory party did what Labour did in 2015, when we zoomed off to the left under Corbyn, that's not going to be an answer for them
I guess
either.
the one thing that's keeping them cheery, though, I have to say, is how badly they think you guys are doing in the first 100 days, losing the Chief of Staff. Keir Starmer's approval ratings tanking. He's now less popular than Nigel Farage. They've got a point, haven't they?
Well, I'm struck. I entered a civil partnership in 2010, and we did it very quickly before the general election because we were frightened that the Tories would get rid of them in 2010. I know that seems unlikely now, but that was our feeling at the time. We had a 3-day honeymoon, and I'm not sure that we as the Labour Party have had even a 3-day honeymoon. And there's a good reason for that in one sense, which is, we came to power at a time when people were very, very angry with the state of the country. I've already referred to the biggest fall in living standards in our history, the feeling that nothing works. I saw that stuff about Euston Station, and you think, but that's a story that's been sitting waiting for more than 10 years. People suddenly crowding and, trying to get to... So if you can't even make a station like Euston work, what kind of country are we? So I feel that when it came to the general election, we didn't want to overpromise. If anything, we were determined to underpromise in the hope that we'd be able to over-deliver. And that has created a bit of a feeling of, gosh, where are we at? It's not felt...
gloomy, to be honest.
Yeah, because some of the feeling in the country is gloomy. Now, I'm permanently overexcited in my job. I've got a great job. The creative industries, which I have a responsibility for, I think are one of our growth industries.
Which I do want to talk to you about. I absolutely will go on to that. But just before I do, the Labour Party does need to take some responsibility, though, right? I mean, it's unusual, isn't it, to lose a Chief of Staff so quickly into becoming a new government.
Yeah, sure. Though I remember the 2010 government when they came in, and I've talked to people who were involved in that when Cameron came in and formed the coalition government in 2010. They made big mistakes in their first few months. A lot, often you do. You do need to learn the ropes. There are some things I think we are getting right now that we are stitching together that will really deliver into the future. There's a whole load of things...
But you acknowledge that you've made mistakes.
Oh, yeah, of course, of course.
Right, let's talk about...
I'm permanently making mistakes in my life. I'm so used to it that... it's sort of my middle name.
Right, let's talk about your brief, shall we? Because you are doing some things in the film industry. Now you're in government, you can get stuff done. Talk to me about your latest announcement.
So there are two things that we want to achieve. First of all, we want really big blockbuster movies to be made in the UK, things like Barbie, brilliant. We've got lots of great sound stages, and that's superb. And we've got lots of talented actors and directors and so on, and we've got lots of great stories to tell. But we also want to make sure that we make really high-class, independent movies. These are the kind of things that cost up to maybe £23.5 million. So what we've announced today, it's a continuation, to be fair, pay tribute where it's due, to what the Tories said they were going to do in the budget earlier on this year, but we're now making this into law. So if you are bringing forward an independent, it's got to be independent, not part of one of the big studios, an independent UK movie, up to £23 million, £23.5 million, you will be able to set aside a large chunk of that against a tax credit. So £6.36 million of your budget has effectively been found before you have to start going out to knock on financiers' doors and do co-productions. So the kind of film that we're talking about, I don't know whether you saw How to Have Sex. Sorry, that sounds like a completely inappropriate question. I'm sorry. All right, sorry, no, I was raw. Let's go back. Did you see the film?
I've got no idea what you're talking about. I haven't seen the film.
It's a wonderful movie. It's very disturbing.
I'll take your word for it.
It's that kind of independent movie which has a very different audience from the big Marvel films, or One Life, maybe you saw, the film about Nicholas Winton bringing people out before the Nazis, just before the Second World War. That kind of movie. So it's not massive, and what is interesting is we got to a stage where if you didn't have this in place now, people were starting to say, well, we're going to have to take this and film it. Even though it's meant to be in the Lake District, we're going to film it in Ireland, or we're going to film it in France or Germany.
Talking about the film industry, I did note the rejected planning application that we've seen for an extension of the film
Marlow.
studio in Marlow, exactly, in Buckinghamshire. Angela Rayner is really looking at it. Is that the kind of project you would like to see go through?
Look, I can't judge it because there's a quasi-judicial process that has to be gone through and all the rest of it. We do need more sound stages in the UK. We've got lots of... 50% of people who work in this industry are freelance. Many of them have had next to no work over the last year because of the actor strike in the United States of America and knock-on over here. So we really do want to make sure that we've got the infrastructure across the whole of the UK. This is part of that.
And you're willing to take on the NIMBYs to do it then? Is that
completely.
the message?
I think, well, Keir Starmer was very clear about this at conference, that sometimes there's a kind of quid pro quo. You know, if you want to grow the economy, you've got to enable that growth to happen. And sometimes it means that you've got to have, you know, a mobile technology infrastructure in your street, or it means that somewhere down the road there's going to be a great film studio which is going to be making blockbuster movies. James Cameron has already committed to it, you know, the director of Titanic. And it is crazy, you know. It also applies to other parts of planning where parts of the tourism industry are really held back because it takes a year to build the thing, but it takes you 4 years to get planning permission. I mean, we need to really seize these opportunities. The creative industry is 6% of the economy. I think it's going to grow. We've got 2 million people working in these industries. I'm passionate about getting creative education for every child in every school. It can't just be kids with really, you know, expensive education that have an opportunity to prosper because, you know, Albert Finney and Glenda Jackson, working-class actors, born on the same day in, I think, 1933. Where are the Glenda Jacksons and Albert Finneys of today? Or where are the really fascinating, you know, perhaps wild directors who have made one film but now want to make a second film? That's often the difficult bit. And I think what we've done today is really going to boost that industry.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
My interview there with Chris Bryant. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you about what's just happened. Sam Coates has just told us that he has a story that he wants to talk about and he's just entered the studio. I have no idea what he's going to talk about. Sam, what have you got?
This morning, Sophie, The Sun revealed that the Home Secretary and the Mayor of London had discussions with the Met, resulting in Taylor Swift, the pop megastar, getting special security for concerts in London over the summer. Initially, the police weren't going to give it. There were discussions with the highest-ranking politicians in the country, and then she got it. And lots of eyebrows have been raised. There's the Sun front page. What I can now reveal is that Yvette Cooper got freebie tickets to Taylor Swift concerts. Well, she was a guest of Taylor Swift's music company. She got hospitality. Universal Music, Taylor Swift's company, gave tickets to Ed Balls, Yvette Cooper's husband, and Ed Balls invited his wife, so she effectively received hospitality from Universal Music. This took place before the Vienna incident, before the discussions about security. But until now, we did not know that Yvette Cooper was the recipient of hospitality that was given to her husband, and he invited her along, which I think will raise some eyebrows. I think in the Home Office, they absolutely insist they didn't do anything wrong. And they also insist it is right that we didn't know, the reason that we did not know that this had been, these tickets had been given and that the declaration had been made was because the value of the tickets was £170, below the threshold for recording. So in effect, we had no ability to know that this had taken place before Yvette Cooper intervened in those discussions. But nevertheless, I think the fact that the Home Secretary was enjoying hospitality from Universal Music, her company, before those discussions took place, will cause inevitable controversy, even if those tickets were given to Ed Balls and he invited his wife.
Sam Coates, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates, Deputy Political Editor there, with an update about the Home Secretary receiving free Taylor Swift tickets. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Right, let's bring back in Matthew Torbett and Tim Montgomery, shall we? Matt, I want to talk to you because it feels like, you know, Chris Bryant there talking about the film industry, but, you know, it has been quite a tough honeymoon for Labour. Sam, just giving us an update there, you know, on the freebie story as well.
Yeah, it's been a shambles, to be quite blunt. I spoke to an MP yesterday who has been in Labour politics in one guise or another for about 50 years. And he said he has never seen the public attitude shift so quickly away from a government in such record time.
Why do you think that's happened then?
Low expectations for a start. I think leaving yourself open to the charge of hypocrisy. I think almost an arrogance of thinking we're allowed to do this sort of stuff. You expect it from the Tories. But, you know, we're responsible people, so we can take these tickets and people will think nothing otherwise. I'm astounded that this stuff has sort of continued. I must admit, whenever somebody wished to donate to an MP I was working for over the last 7 years, it would always make me a little bit nervous if I didn't know who they were, because you don't know what they've said before on certain subjects, whether they've written anything, particularly during the Brexit era. And I cannot believe that there aren't people around the operation in Number 10 or otherwise going, let's just have a little think about how this may look. Now, there's no suggestion anybody has done anything wrong at this point, and it's all well within the rules, and that's fine. But how does it look to people? And I think there's no class consciousness. When the Labour Party wishes to represent working class people have to live within their means. They don't get the opportunity for things like freebies, and they expect that of other people that are going to preach to them.
Including pensioners who just had their winter fuel allowance cut. You know, that's the context, isn't it? People might, if people were getting tax cuts, if they were being, you know, they were affordable from a government, people might understand the freebie culture. But when their own sort of basic things like winter fuel allowance is being cut, that's when I think the Labour behaviour really does cut through politically.
I guess at the same time, though, you know, if you look at the opposition and the Conservatives in a very kind of introspective mood, it perhaps gives them a bit of an easier time. I was very interested, I have to say, by what you were telling me a little earlier about Grant Shapps. What's going on there? What have you been hearing?
Yeah, well, apologies to Grant Shapps in advance for saying this, but I heard from someone inside the Boris campaign, an absolutely impeccable source, that when Boris was running for the leadership and Grant Shapps was behind the scenes, being the sort of Machiavellian manipulator, that he quite liked to boast about how he was helping votes to be cast for different candidates to, you know, ensure that it got the result that they wanted. I've heard the same today. Two people who are absolutely livid inside the Cleverly campaign, they're blaming Grant Shapps again. So I'm sure he would deny that he had any involvement in all of this, but there is a lot of fire. Friendly fire, I think is the expression, but it's certainly not friendly from what I hear in being directed towards the former Defence Secretary by the Cleverly campaign. They're blaming him for this mess up today.
Interesting. We haven't, of course, heard from Grant Shapps. Should be said, we should try and reach out to him to see what he has to say about all of that. Thank you very much, both of you. Now, this weekend marks the 40th anniversary of the Brighton hotel bombing, and the attack by the IRA in 1984 happened at the Grand Hotel, the venue for that year's Conservative Party conference. 5 people were killed, 34 injured. Now, among those who lost their lives was Sir Anthony Berry, who, of course, was an MP. I've been speaking to his daughter, Jo Berry, who's since become a peace activist, a journey over many years which saw her meeting the man who planted the bomb. Take a listen. Thank you so much for speaking to us today. We really appreciate it. You have the most extraordinary story. It feels to be like it is a really upsetting story, obviously, but also a strangely uplifting story as well. And it's all about, of course, I guess in many ways it started with the horrific event 40 years ago, the anniversary that we're, of course, be marking on Saturday, the Brighton bomb. Yeah. Your father was killed, wasn't he?
Yes, he was one of 5 killed. In 1984, October the 12th, he was staying in the hotel with his wife, my stepmother, and sadly, they found his body. And I adored my dad. I was 27, and I imagined we'd have decades together. And I didn't just lose him, I lost the sense of me living in peacetime, because that bomb also made me feel like I was part of a war, I was part of a violent conflict. How it happened was really important to me. And the shock and the horror was massive. And I think because I felt so much trauma, I felt so much pain, just was thinking a lot about other people who experienced this, I made the decision 2 days later, can I bring something positive out of this? Can I understand those who killed my dad? Because I don't want an enemy. Can I try and be part of a world where people don't get killed? And so a journey started, and it was only 2 days later. But it was it gave me a sense of like there was a journey to go on, rather than sort of being overwhelmed with this loss and shock and horror.
A purpose in some ways, I guess.
Purpose, yeah.
I'm very keen to talk about your journey. Can I ask, how did you first find out that your dad had been killed?
Well, I found out because I was staying with my sister, and she'd heard the news on the 6 o'clock news that a bomb had gone off at the Grand Hotel. And so she woke me up and said, you know, is Dad staying at the Grand Hotel? And I said, I think he is. I think he moved the day before, and he's there. And so we then had to wait about 8 hours. And my brother was living in Brighton, and he went to the Grand Hotel to try and find his dad. He was asking people, he was trying to see if anyone had seen him and get news, and eventually he identified the body with his own signet ring, because they shared the ring, the same one. And so he rang us up. Yeah, and then he rang us up and said, yeah, we found his body. Can you now go and tell my half-brother and half-sister that their mum's injured and their dad's dead? And like these days, that wouldn't happen. There'd be support and professionals, but we would just on our own, just going off to these schools to let them know what had happened, and then take them to their aunts. So it was a day. You know, someone said to me recently, maybe have you forgotten about that day? And I was like, no, it's like frozen in time, because it was so intense, that waiting, that hoping against
8
hope.
hours?
Yes, maybe even longer, just hoping they were going to find him. And we were watching the news, trying to see if we could perhaps see him. Maybe he slipped into the conference. But then, I suppose as the day went on, the hope faded.
What was your dad like?
He was a real family man. He had 6 children, and he loved nothing more than having them all together and making sure everyone was happy. It was really important to him. And he was also the kind of politician that would speak to everyone and cared. Didn't matter who people had voted for. He was there for everyone. And I remember as a child going to places with him, and in Southgate, where he was MP, and people would stop him and ask him questions, and he had lots of time. And I remember getting frustrated because we were on our way somewhere and we were delayed. But looking back on it, it's because he was a very caring man.
Yeah. I mean, you obviously loved him a lot. That comes through very strongly. You described the man who did it, who killed your father, as a friend. I think a lot of people will, I guess, admire it, but just have no idea how that is possible.
Well, it's an unusual friendship, and we don't really have the right words in the English language to describe it, because it's a friendship based on we meet because of what he did. You know, that's not going to go away. He's always going to be the man who planted the bomb, but he's also the man who's, for the last 24 years, been in dialogue with me. You know, and I'm not an easy option for him. You know, when he met me, he came with a sense of, well, I'm okay, I've got no problems, because I was part of the oppressed. And he had like a self-righteousness about him.
So when you first met, he had no regrets then? He thought he'd done the right thing?
Yeah. Yeah, and I knew...
It must have been hard for you to hear that.
No, I knew. I kind of did my own preparation by asking and speaking to other men who were in the IRA. And so I was prepared for that. And my reason to meet him was to see him as a human being, to hear his story, to see some humanity in him. Because at that time, he was the most dehumanised terrorist we had. Obviously, things have changed since then. But, you know, he almost killed the whole government. So the labels he'd been given were not going to help me see him as a human being. And I thought if I could see him without all the labels, that would somehow restore some of my humanity that was taken away in the bomb. And so my plan was to go and see him, have a conversation, leave, and never see him again. And no one would ever know. That was my plan.
And then what happened?
Well, he changed. He changed halfway through, and he would later say that he was disarmed by my empathy. And if I'd gone in there arguing, going, I'm right, you're wrong, and he would have stayed in a very safe place of righteousness. But about halfway through, he said he could no longer keep this position he was in, and he took off the political mask and became open and vulnerable and wanted to know about my dad, and his whole voice changed, everything changed, and I stayed, even though it was like really scary. Well, the whole thing was terrifying.
Yeah,
but I stayed because this seemed to be something different. And when he planted that bomb, and this is the nature of bombs and violence, that he didn't see anyone in the hotel. He didn't see human beings. He'd taken away their humanity. And then through meeting me, he begins to realise, oh, okay, I've killed a wonderful human being. I've killed a human being with a soul. I've done that. And he wanted to know about the impact on me of what happened to me after the bomb went off, how I felt. Some of the, I went to Belfast in '85 and '86. We talked about that. And, he's beginning to realise that he's responsible for killing an amazing human being.
Do you want to talk a little bit, finally, about how you are going to be marking the 40-year anniversary? I'm sure there's stuff that you're doing separately, but also things that you're doing with Patrick, the man who, of course, was responsible for the bomb.
Yes, well, normally I think of like one event I want to do, but this year, for me, it's about a year, and it's a year of wanting to really make an impact, of bringing more compassion and empathy and deepening our humanity, and also recognition of 40 years of being on this crazy journey I've been on, and revisiting some of the places I've been. And so the first event is going to be on the 16th of October in London at St James's Church, where is the place that I made that decision. And I'm going back there with Patrick McGee in collaboration with the Forgiveness Project, which is an amazing charity. And Marina Cantacuzino is going to be our facilitator.
So you're going to be in the church, sitting side by side with a man who killed your dad?
Yes, I am. And it means so much to me. I think I'll be really emotional to go back to the place, because the 27-year-old me that said I'm going to understand and bring something positive, I never thought that this would happen. And obviously I wished my father had never been killed, but I'm grateful for the opportunities that I've been given and created as well, and the things that I've learned. I couldn't have learned any other way. And so being back at that church with Patrick and really feeling what does this mean for both of us to be here as well, for him too, and what is it we've been learning through this sometimes challenging dialogue.
You must be quite proud of that 27-year-old.
Yes, I am. I can sometimes feel a bit hard on her, because I'm like, well, she didn't have a clue. But actually, I had that focus, and I am proud of her. And for me, it is about, is there a way that I can turn what's happened into something positive? And I do wake up every morning and still think, I want to do more, I haven't finished, and that's why this year is so important. It's not like I'm going to retire after this year, I won't stop, but I want this year really to be, and I say the world, we need it. We need more examples of doing things differently. We need more compassion and kindness and what I call unbounded empathy. And so that's my plan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Interview there with the absolutely remarkable Jo Berry, with a very powerful message there, I have to say. Now, back to the battle of the Titans, the head-to-head to end all head-to-heads. Yes, it is the latest Conservative leadership race, the first one since, well, the last one. It might feel like the party is in constant flux over its leader, but here on the Politics Hub, we actually really love a Tory leadership race. Really, we do. The merch, the gaffes, the backers who change their minds. It is a roller coaster. But just in case you're not convinced, we thought we would bring you some highlights from previous contests for the Conservative crown.
Andrea Leadsom has apologised to Theresa May after suggesting in an interview that having children made her better qualified to be Prime Minister.
I haven't gone round the cabinet asking for oaths of loyalty. I don't need to.
So you go, Tim. You've got a starring role.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure that soundtrack to the that was sufficiently respectful to the Conservative Party process.
I really apologise.
I'll be talking to Ofcom in the morning about that.
Any particular highlights from previous leadership contests?
There just seems to be so many. That's the extraordinary thing about it. We seem like I think we're keeping you guys in business actually as a party. You know, it's too much circus and too much theatre, but. Matthew and I were talking about whether there's likely to be another Tory leadership race in this Parliament. And I wouldn't bet against it. I wouldn't bet against it.
Yeah. What do you think then, Matthew?
Former Spads I've spoken to, and they know their party better than me, have said MPs will panic if the locals don't go well, and the same with Scotland and Wales. And I think if it's Kemi in particular, I think she's sufficiently annoyed enough people and has enough enemies for the knives to come out quite early. And I think if they look to try and do something different, somebody seen as more sensible, James Cleverly will get another bite at the cherry. That's what I think.
One of our producers, Jack, pointed out that if this Conservative leader manages to make it to the next election, then they'll have lasted longer than any Tory leader since David Cameron, which perhaps shows you the roller coaster.
Well, there's a point there. The Conservative Party is actually in a really precarious position. I think there is Labour's troubles, which are real. Matthew's been really honest and candid about them tonight. But the Tory party suffered a massive defeat only a few months ago. I don't always agree with Chris Bryant, but he was right about that. There hasn't been sufficient reform of the party organisation, reform of the party message, and enough discussion of that yet. And so there'll be a lot of happiness in the Badenoch and Jenrick campaigns tonight, and particularly if one of them wins. But my goodness, I wouldn't almost wish the task that the winner of the Conservative leadership race will inherit on my worst enemy. It's going to be massive.
You do wonder, don't you, if
who'd
perhaps...
want it?
Yeah, who'd want it, and maybe some people sitting this one out, waiting for the next one, as you were, the point you were making, Matthew. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have you both on the Politics Hub this evening. It's been a busy day here in Westminster, I'm not going to lie. Thank you for joining us tonight. I will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah, Jane, me, and then, of course, at 9 p.m, The World with Yalda Hakeem. But I will see you right here, back at 7 p.m. tomorrow night, after a very busy day when we have finally got the two contenders for the Conservative crown confirmed.